Hi, all. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a wonderful panel of Cambridge alumni here, all of whom have very interesting careers outside of the legal profession. So I'm going to turn over to them now and allow them to introduce themselves. So if we wanted to start with Ali Jaffer.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me this evening. My name's Ali Jaffer. I am a vice principal of a secondary school in South Hertfordshire. It's my current role. I studied law at Cambridge some time ago now, and I've had a fairly circuitous route to my current position. By way of sort of brief background. I started by training on the Teach First program, not knowing that I necessarily wanted to be a teacher. I tried to keep my options open during that time. So during my training, I also completed the legal practice course, and then following 2 years training on the Teach First program, I briefly started a training contract with a Silver Circle law firm in London, but I missed teaching and so quit after 8 weeks, and then returned to the classroom, where I set up. I envisioned and set up an academic sixth form college in Sheffield. I spent 4 years in various roles there, including as deputy head, and then I had a couple of years in the civil service where I worked for the Social Mobility Commission, looking after education policy. Following 2 years there, and sort of prompted by the pandemic, I returned to school leadership, and I've had various school leadership positions over the last 4 years, and I've been at my current employer for the last 3. So that's a brief background to my career. I'm looking forward to talking to you more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next, I think we'd love to welcome Claire.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Claire Cornwell. I graduated with a law degree in 1996, which is a very long time ago now. And I think this is going to be a really fascinating evening because it's really interesting to hear where Ali went. So I did my LPC and I did a training contract with a law firm. I then stayed there for 10 years and made partner there in corporate litigation. And I then moved to the charity world. I ran a human rights NGO for 10 years, for 8 years, and I then worked in Amnesty, another human rights NGO, for a further 2 years. And I've now just started a completely different thing, which is kind of running the family business, where I am managing the literary estate of John le Carré. So he was my father. He wrote a bunch of espionage novels, and I'm trying to work out how we exploit the IP rights there, which is mainly kind of film and TV stuff.
I think we've lost Claire. Claire, I think your bandwidth might be a little bit ropey, but we've got you back. And we're also joined by Ali Shalchi. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi Lizzie, hi everyone. So I graduated from Cambridge Law in 2015. I went into the corporate world, trained at Slaughter & May, qualified into their banking department, also spent some time in alumni in Dubai. And then I went to work in the House of Commons, where I work as a policy clerk, advising MPs on financial services law. I've undertaken secondments to Cabinet Office and the diplomatic service at the Foreign Office, so I can speak to those as well if you'd like me to. Lovely to meet everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Jennifer, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Johnston. I graduated in 1998 from Cambridge with a law degree. I went to London first to do the bar course, followed by pupillage and then tenancy at 1 Crown Office Row in London. At the bar, I specialised in professional negligence, environmental law, and a little bit of human rights and actions against the police. But after a few years, another string to my bow was activated when it was suggested to me I might consider pursuing singing as a career. And I went and studied at the Royal College of Music for 3 years, and then into a career as an opera singer, which is what I'm still doing now, as well as being a creative producer for national museums, including at the moment London Transport Museum.
Wonderful. And Barbara, if you'd like to close out the introductions.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. I also graduated from the law faculty in 1998, and I went straight into finance. I worked for Morgan Stanley's New York headquarters in the mergers and acquisition department. And then I went to Hong Kong to Morgan Stanley. That's where I'm originally from, to do M&A. And then I quit, and then I decided to go to the investment side. So I joined Goldman's internal hedge fund unit, which is their principal strategies group. And I was there for 5 years until I became the head of the group for Asia. And then I quit, and I was poached to join another hedge fund to lead and head the Asia office. And after that, I did it for another 5 years, and my husband convinced me that we should start our own fund, and that's what I did. We started our own investment fund and been managing our own capital. And fast forward in 2016, we also started a charity called the Citron Foundation to try to find a cure for rare disease. And fast forward in 2021, we're in 2024. Yes, I started another charity called Nova Academy to provide online education for young students globally. So I got a very different experience. I'm happy to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. I think to start out with, because obviously you've all come from vastly different careers with varying amounts of involvement in the legal sector. So I wonder, and feel free to take this, anybody, what helped you to kind of decide to take a non-law path, whether that was during your undergraduate degree or after a few years in the legal sector?
But do you want to take that, Lizzie, on in particular?
I suppose anybody could take it if you feel strongly, but I know, Barbara, that you kind of knew quite early on in your undergraduate degree that maybe pursuing a legal career wasn't for you.
Yeah, I went to it with a very open-minded to study law, to either becoming a lawyer or not becoming a lawyer. To me, studying law is all about the fundamental skills of, being analytical, being logical, being able to read a lot of information and to decide what's important and what's not. And so, I thought they were excellent training, but by no means in my mind, I thought I had to be a lawyer going into it. So when I look at my career options upon graduation, I had a very open mind, and I applied to law firm. I also applied to non-law firms. And through the interview process and through my summer internship experience, I came to the conclusion that I would rather pursue finance upon graduation.
So I had... Sorry, it's Claire here, and I hope that my connection has sorted out. I had a different situation where during my law degree, I always thought I was going to go forwards and do law. And I did a training contract with a firm and then stayed there actually in total for 10 years. So a very different path. But having been in a law firm for 10 years, I'd sort of felt as though that was actually really quite a long time. And it also coincided with a long time ago now, but the war on terror and Guantanamo Bay and so forth, which I felt very outraged by. And so I moved from my law firm to a charity called Reprieve, which I went in as executive director, and worked there. Not actually, I mean, it was a legal charity because it did a lot of human rights work. And the idea was to defend people who are in Guantanamo and also people facing the death penalty. But I was doing much more of a sort of management role and a sort of strategic role. And so that's how I moved. And it was very odd. And I know one of the other people was talking about this as well, you know, moving from a role where you're quite settled is quite an odd thing to do, because all of the people around you also have pursued that career and are probably going to continue pursuing that career. And so sort of branching left or right and doing something completely different, I think makes people quite surprised. And that was one of the interesting pieces around making that change, I found.
I'm happy to come in, Lizzie. So I did the second year internships like everyone else, and I just felt that most of them were commercial. In fact, all of them were commercial, and I just felt that they just weren't very interesting. I loved being a law student in Cambridge. I loved the debates with professors and with my peers around various academic disciplines, but ultimately commercial practice for me was just sort of broadly about disputes between kind of large corporations and making money for large corporations, and it never really did it for me. I'm quite sort of slightly jealous of Claire and her exciting career, and I spent some time at the charity Liberty as well as a volunteer, and I thought very hard about human rights and criminal law, but ultimately didn't decide to pursue that particular path, probably for no other reason than opportunities were potentially harder to come by. But I was fairly clear from kind of sort of halfway through my second year, and certainly by the start of my third year, that broader commercial practice wasn't for me. I did mention that I did 8 weeks at a Silver Circle law firm, and that sort of confirmed it for me even more. I mean, I was in IP, and IP was the area that I was most interested in, but it still wasn't interesting enough. So I kind of just went with what I felt was most interesting with at the time. And I think, and I'm not sure because who knows what will come next, but I think a law degree from Cambridge sort of gives you enough of a headwind such that you can probably move around a bit until you find a niche that kind of works.
Yeah, absolutely. That it sounds like you've all had very kind of different, but also somewhat overlapping experiences of how you kind of found an area where you settled into. I wonder, particularly I'm thinking of you, Ali Shelchi, how your law degree was able to kind of help you and give you skills that you could take into whatever you were doing next. I know, Ali, that you work kind of adjacent to the law as well, and then Claire, also you working in the estate.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say a law degree doesn't necessarily need to teach you that much about the law, because in your 3 years, you will do all your core modules and choose a few. But by the time that people graduate from a law degree, they have only really scratched the surface of what there is to know about law. So even if you go into a law firm, you'll be learning so much. So I think what's really important is not necessarily the content you get from a law degree, but the really valuable analytical skills, critical thinking skills, and reading skills. And that can be valuable in so many different fields. I think it will be really valuable if you wanted to become a journalist, or if you wanted to be in public policy, or if you wanted to be a politician, frankly. And for me, what I do advising MPs on financial services policy, it's incredibly valuable, because you think about, what is the government bringing forward? What's it going to add? Why are they doing it? And these kinds of broad analytical skills, I think, are so valuable in my job. and have been in every single role I've ever undertaken. And so what I would say to everyone watching is, if you're doing a law degree, think about the skills that you're gaining from it, not just the content that you are studying. And those skills are so transferable across so many hundreds of different jobs. So it's a really great way to start your career.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, not least because it brings you out able to write, I think, and actually really quite a lot of people in the world don't end up with that skill. So you realize as you get older and see more and more people who are, anyway. Yeah, just following up on Lizzie's point about the estate. So I'm now doing a completely other thing, which is I'm working for a literary estate. My father-in-law was John le Carré, who wrote espionage novels. And so I'm now sort of doing family business stuff where I'm looking at how we can exploit that IP, which is basically sort of, well, it kind of comes down to film and television, although I'm considering graphic novels at the moment, which is an exciting sideline. But I just really echoing what Ali said, I think that the stuff, the skills that you learn are the vital ones. I do think, well, I think law firms, and Jennifer will talk about the bar as well, which is another whole fascinating area that I don't know about, but I do think it's a very, it's an acquired taste, right? Whether you can do a law firm or the bar. But if you do decide that you want to do that, I do think that potentially doing a training contract or the equivalent at bar and then potentially staying for a year or two is a kind of useful training ground if you haven't got a clear alternative of what you're looking to do. I think that others on here who had a kind of, knew what they wanted and loved it and went that way, I have huge respect for, but I didn't at that point. And so I just kind of fell into my law firm, and it was a good training ground. And I think it's actually partly that taught me to be able to walk into a room full of people and talk to them, or to stand up and talk to people. And so, and indeed to write endlessly. And so, I would say don't write that off. Although do, for goodness sake, go into the law firms and do the internships, because they are quite an acquired taste, as I say. And if you don't like them, then it's probably not going to work. I'll hush now, but yeah, and maybe hand over to Jennifer to talk a bit about the bar side, because that was fascinating in our prep call.
Yes, I think in my experience, there's a very big difference between the personality types that would go to become solicitors and those of us that went to the bar. I think those of us who became barristers are natural performers. We're very happy and comfortable in front of an audience, and can generally talk at length without notes, which is a skill that is something that's quite important at the bar, where your brain can work in the background whilst you talk. I think, not everybody can do or would want to do a job which required that. We call that being on your feet. It's certainly a skill that has helped. And also I would agree that my writing skills have come in very handy indeed. I've written for national newspapers, amongst other things. And the capacity to analyze and break down a big problem into small chunks is also a skill you very much need out in the big wide world that has very little to do with the law. It's just, there are transferable skills that you acquire doing a law degree. The bar itself, though, is also different, because as a barrister, you're self-employed for the most part. Some people do go and join law firms as a barrister in a law firm. That is a possible route. You can also become a solicitor advocate, again, where you're generally in employment, sometimes within a big bank, or there's a myriad of different firms that employ both barristers and solicitor advocates. But the bar itself, you are self-employed. So my entire career, I've been freelance. So it means that I've never done a job interview in the conventional sense, and I've never needed a CV in the conventional way that other people would require one. That makes me very different, I think, in outlook. My working life is one where there is no pattern whatsoever. Each day is different. Each day brings its own challenges and its own rewards. And certainly as a performer, it also brings its own risks, because obviously my job requires my health to be tip top. But in terms of the producing that I do as well, that requires strategic thought. It requires working. My boss at the London Transport Museum is the boss of the museum, so I work at a very high level there. What I would say to all of you is that actually the really important thing in life in general is never having any regrets. And so if there's something you want to try and go and do for a bit, that's okay. I think we've moved away from the idea that you have to spend your entire life doing the same thing. That it's absolutely okay to have a portfolio career, or one where you perhaps move from one thing to the next. I mean, Claire's an example of somebody who was in practice but then has moved into NGOs and charities and so on. You need to go with your gut instinct. One thing about the bar is that you take a big risk because you have to fund it yourself. You don't. It's a bit like any freelance career. There are scholarships available, but for the most part, you will bear the financial risk of both bar school and pupillage and into your career. That isn't easy for everybody to comprehend or to be able to take on. So I can understand why it's so attractive when big solicitors firms come along and throw really extraordinary amounts of money at people. I would encourage you all to stand on your own 2 feet, though, and try and not think about money, and instead think about what kind of life you'd like, and where you see your own skill set fitting in. And also, I would quite honestly have died inside if I'd become a solicitor. So it isn't for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as Barbara said earlier, kind of like understanding quite early on, or maybe later on at any point, what you want to get out of not only your law degree, but your career. And I wonder to that point, whether you think that it is, whether studying law can be the right choice for somebody who doesn't necessarily even want to go into the law from the get-go. Is that something that you think there are any drawbacks to, or something that could be perfectly valid?
I think most employers would accept a law degree as being a benchmark for somebody's both intelligence and skill level. So I think you're never going to do yourself a disservice for choosing law as a degree at undergraduate level. The question is whether you then want to develop that into a career, or whether you want to use the skills you've developed during the degree to move into something else. There is no shame in any of it. It's more that I think, particularly a Cambridge law degree, carries with it a hallmark, and it's one that I even now it's commented on. So it never leaves you, because you're taught at such a high level that actually inevitably there is an assumption made by those looking at your CV that you are capable at a certain level with a certain skill set. So it is highly recommended, particularly if you have no idea what you want to do in life, which, I mean, let's face it, most 18-year-olds don't really. You're quite rare if at 18 you're absolutely fixed on a path in life.
And I think also on that there's a point which goes, if you do a law degree, it has such a massive, there is such a massive number of things you can do with that, right? Even if you are not like any of us, and even if you stay within the law, you can be a public interest barrister, or you can be an M&A solicitor specializing in aircraft hangars, right? And those two things are very, very different, but come from the same degree. I do think that one of the problems that is facing everyone who's listening to this, and certainly I felt it, is that if you do go into, I think especially as a solicitor, but possibly as a barrister too, into a firm, you do end up getting specialized quite quickly. And so, you can do your training contract, but then if you go into kind of one thing, I think we're all living proof that you can change in a more radical way than between two areas of law. But I think that is I remember I was in this commercial firm and I did a commercial training. And I then wanted to do public interest law. And I remember going to interviews at, all the splendid public law firms. And they all said, well, why would we take you on? Because you've just done 2 years training in commercial law. And I was kind of like, well, yeah, but I really want to do this now. So I think there's an element of that. But anyway, that's I completely agree with everything that's been said in terms of that it's a great place. And I remember randomly meeting someone who was trying to recruit me and to do something completely different, and said what we need is a Cambridge lawyer. And it's a slightly maybe a slightly anachronistic view, but it is a view that's still out there, that it's an incredibly useful qualification to have. So
yeah, I cannot agree more. I think that the training and the teaching that you receive at a Cambridge law degree is incredibly valuable for any prospective career. Besides a few very specialized ones like medicine, or if you want to be a scientist, obviously that's all. But anything else, people will look at this CV. Actually, you stand out, right? If you're a lawyer and you go apply to be, I don't know, a communication officer, marketing, finance, business, you actually bring in a different perspective, but with a very logical and analytical mind. An employer actually like that. So I actually think it's a plus. And so I think a law degree is not a training of skills, a training of the mind. And this is the mind that is highly desirable and applicable for many things that you want to do in your life, not only in your career and profession, but for yourself as a whole, as a person. So I definitely think even if you don't want to be a lawyer on a get-go, it's still a really highly desirable and a valuable degree. And I give you some background. I actually did social and political science in my first year and switched to law in my second year. So I actually have a taste of 2 degrees in Cambridge. And I would say that the law degree really gives you a very rigorous training in terms of analytical, critical thinking. And the law professors at the faculty is amazing. They were one of the best legal minds in this world, in this country. So I really think it's invaluable.
Absolutely. I wonder, kind of similar to that, you talked earlier, a few of you, about kind of not being sure exactly what to do. And obviously you've all found places where you found success and you found perhaps more enjoyment than you did or would have done if you'd stuck in the legal career. And I wonder what sort of advice you could give to people who are currently listening about how to start to think about your career and where it might go. And what sort of resources you might look to. I wonder, Ali, Jaffer, especially, considering that you did teach first, how did you start to think about where you might take your career?
Thanks, Lizzie. I think sort of slightly, quite haphazardly, to be honest. I sort of fell into teach first at the start because there was someone from a graduate recruitment event who twisted my arm to apply, and then I ended up doing it and really absolutely loving it. And then there was this, opportunity to work on the setup of a school, and I guess the thing which other people have sort of mentioned, which I'd like to mention as well, is that I think that the Cambridge Law degree gives you almost the confidence that you can just kind of have a go. I was in my early 20s when we set up this school, and it was it was an exciting thing to do. And then when I ended up leaving and working for the civil service, I think again it was the confidence from the degree, which was like, well, why not try working for the civil service and see what that's like. That's not to say that I've been successful with every job I've applied for either, because I haven't. But I guess to answer your question, I think there are probably, if I were to talk to my younger self, there is probably some advice which I would give that person, which is probably the network, building up networks, which I find it quite difficult to say, having worked at the Social Mobility Commission and sort of campaigned against nepotism quite strongly. But it is about who you know as much as what you know, not necessarily because they can get you a job, but just because they can open your mind to different opportunities that you might not necessarily have thought of. And then I guess the second thing I would say is to echo what Jennifer, I think, said earlier, which is to sort of follow your gut, because you have the skill set and the personal development offered by the degree, such that when you see an opportunity, there's no reason why you can't go for it. And there are so many things I see out there every day. I mean, I'm not necessarily sure I will stay, where I am now for the next 10 years. Well, I might go into go back into a legal career potentially. And that's not necessarily out of the question, but I think just being able to see those opportunities and understand what they are, and then having the confidence to sort of go for them would be the advice that I would give to people who are thinking about a portfolio career or a non-law career.
Wonderful. I think that's really good advice, and perhaps some of that I will be writing down once I get the word for word, once I get the recording of this. I think that having the confidence is quite a good way to put it. And thinking about that and kind of having that confidence and having that background, I'm wondering what sorts of things that you think people can start doing, you, Ali, or anybody can start doing to give them the confidence, either within the legal field, if they wanted to do that, or elsewhere, that can give them the confidence that they can do those sorts of things, whether that's extracurricular activities or kind of pursuing their interests. That would give them that background of get up and go.
So very quickly, before I pass on to the others, I think, yes, find an interest and go for it. When I was at Magdalen, I threw myself into the JCR roles. I threw myself into the newspaper. I was a sports editor of the newspaper, and I was really bad at sport myself, but I still tried to represent the college at every sport I could. And I think the other thing to say on this, it was sort of what I touched on before about having a network. Sort of later on in my career, I had the benefit of having a couple of mentors who I just didn't necessarily seek out, but ended up working with, who when I've found myself in a difficult position or lacking confidence, being able to just pick up the phone and speak to them has provided me with a huge pickup. And I think if you can find people who can kind of vouch for you and give you that pickup, that's often invaluable.
Yeah, I would agree with that massively. I think mentorship is a very important part of any career. You have to find people that you trust, but the significance of them can be not about the job itself, but about you and about your ability to understand your own skills, your own abilities, and in terms of supporting your self-confidence. My mentor is why I'm doing this talk today. She was my director of studies and is now the master at Keys, Pippa Rogerson, and I'm sure some of you have all been taught by her, actually. She, even now, I mean, she's like my mum, basically. She's like another parent. I've been very close to her since I was at college, and the need for me to talk to her hasn't been about law. Instead, it's been about, am I capable of doing this? Even down to, I did a Women in Leadership certificate at Harvard University, and I was really concerned before starting it that I'd been a long time out of academic work and education, and I had a complete panic. And I said to her, I don't know if I can do this. And she said, utter rubbish, just go and get on with it. And you need somebody sometimes to give you a kick up the backside and say, look, stop being silly, just go and get on with it. And the thing about mentors is that very often they'll bring a perspective to things born out of experience that perhaps you wouldn't get from elsewhere. So have a close look at who you know, not necessarily in terms of networking, but in terms of support, and find people that give you what you need in terms of then being able to make the next step forwards. It's never worth looking too far ahead, but certainly in the next 1 or 2 steps in your life and in your career, it is worth seeking out the advice of those who have been through those things themselves, or perhaps, as I say, that you naturally trust and get on with.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. I think it's great, and I would say more than one. I would say like as many as you feel you can manage. I was just going to say that the piece of advice that I was given that I felt was useful was to think about what you actually enjoy doing in the day, and to try to kind of sculpt your work around that. And so I guess if you have this amazing time at Cambridge, like try doing the debating and the moots and that stuff, and see if you enjoy it. And if you do, then something along Jennifer's, route of getting up on your feet might well be your thing. I tried it, and I knew that I didn't want to do that every day. But equally, also if you love very detailed documents, tax lawyering maybe for you. Again, I found that I really liked meeting people, working with people. And the thing that I was then able to do at my law firm was bring in a bunch of clients. And so I think it's just a question of working out sort of what you enjoy doing and what you're good at, because it's going to be much easier to do that for longer. And the thing that I would say is life is very long and work is very long. And so trying to find something that you can actually bear doing every day and even enjoy doing is very well worth trying to spend time on. So, yeah. I know that at the time, and my time when I was there, all I wanted was for someone to give me a training contract so that I had something to go to and had money that was going to come in and pay off my student debts. And obviously that, I'm sure, is the case for lots of people, but it is worth trying to think beyond that, because something will happen which will be splendid. So, yeah.
I'm just going to follow from what Claire's just said, though, which is that in no working life will you ever have a perfect experience. I'm sorry to break your hearts, but there will be many times in a career where you'll absolutely loathe what you're doing, despite actually loving it in the grand scheme. No job brings an existence which is without issue. And that's partly because in no job do you live in a bubble? I mean, other people get involved. You don't necessarily get on with everybody you are forced to work with. You can move from place to place sometimes and thinking it might be, the grass is greener and it might be better than where you've just been. But at the end of the day, you have to look at things over a longer period, really, and understand that for all the bumps in the road, you will be better off being somewhere where at least you believe in what you're doing. The worst thing is to be stuck somewhere where you don't believe in the work that you're either being given to do or being forced to do in some cases. I think maybe Ali Shalchi is probably going to agree with that you have to hold on to the beliefs that you have, even when you're buffeted. But if you start out not caring in about what you're doing, then in the end of the day, you won't stick at it anyway.
Yeah, no, I do agree. And I think it's so important to think about what someone wants out of their career. Enjoyment and fulfillment is fantastic, but it's also important to acknowledge that there is privilege in a way, and not everyone is able to just simply go after that all the time. It's very unfashionable these days to say that you want a high earning career, but I think that's perfectly acceptable. Not least because the people who are going to listen to this and go into high earning careers are going to pay our pensions. So good for you. And so whatever you want out of your career, I think it's perfectly acceptable. And I think you should just go after it and not be overly worried about necessarily what others will think or whether you think that you want to do it forever. But at the same time, if what you want is a career where you are very, very highly motivated and you think that you want to enjoy every minute of it, then it's important to not let money or lack of it be a really fundamental factor. And you have to be prepared to make sacrifices, because no job will give you everything.
Absolutely. I think that those are all really good kind of insights into how one might approach thinking about work as a whole, whether it's in the legal field or elsewhere. Making quite a large leap. Before we transition to some questions that we have, I do wonder if anybody in particular has some advice on, as people are, preparing for their career either in the legal sector or elsewhere, what sort of things can one think about, especially for a CV that might be particularly transferable, especially if, maybe you do 10 years working as a solicitor and then you choose to do something else, or you make that kind of leap in the dark to something else, or even as you're doing a law degree, but maybe that's not the right thing for you. What can you think about doing in your free time that might help when you do come to looking for employment?
Go and get as much work experience as you possibly can, no matter what aspect of what you're looking at it involves, and go and follow other interests too. I'm a very good example of somebody who's not working in the law because I have other skills which I always knew I had. So the one thing about Cambridge that's great is that nobody's snobbish about you having a number of things that you're good at. You might find, as there were in my year, my supervision partner for criminology is now presenting The Crystal Maze on telly. So the pair of us are not really adverts for how to have a great legal career after reading law at Cambridge. So in terms of your other skills, look at what other strengths you have, and also if you're particularly passionate about anything else, pursue those things too. And you never know. I mean, there are ways of, a bit like with the John Le Carre estate, there are ways of, for example, merging law and the literary world, for instance, or law and advertising, or law and publishing, and law. And so, there's a huge range of things there. Because of just doubling back on what I said before, really in the end of the day, you really want to follow your passions, and actually discovering what those are is also quite an important process, which should really begin when you're an undergraduate.
And I can come in too with just some sort of tips from my time. I've always found it amazing how some people might go through school working so hard to get the best grades, and then work hard to get into a good uni, and then work hard at uni. And then when they come to applying for their jobs, they put so little effort into many of their job applications, and they will be riddled with sort of typos or not well thought out. So in terms of things to do when applying, I would say, of course, all of the other stuff is important, but the most important thing is to be willing to put time and effort into your actual job applications themselves. Because if you aren't willing or able to do that, then no matter how good your fundamentals are, you're very unlikely to get a look in.
I would just add that, Cambridge has a wide range of exposure where you can get from extracurricular activities that some of these people talk about to, there's a lot of companies come and talk about what their company does, what the career is like to be XYZ. If you want to have a broader perspective of the world, you can't just go attend to many of these events and get a taste of what it's like and talk to as many people as you can. I find it incredibly helpful if you're applying for a job to have a better context of the company, the culture, and the profession or industry that you're applying to, than just like, this is me and this is my CV, take it or leave it. Because very often it's about a fit. And so if you really want to go into something, it's not just presenting yourself, but it's also thinking about where is that fit from the employer perspective as well. And I think that could be, you know, quite helpful when you think about your CV and you're applying. And I would even suggest that you have a slightly different version of your CV if you're applying to two completely different fields, because, you know, very often what one field emphasizes on in terms of skill may be very different from another one.
One possibility, and I don't know if this is a good idea actually, but I'll suggest it anyway, is thinking about joining a board. If you care about something, if it's rowing, there will be NGOs that support rowing. If it's health issues, there will be NGOs that support health issues. And I mean, the problem about joining a board is that it's actually quite a lot of hard work, and it can be horrific if the NGO goes wrong. But you do see how a business works and how an organization works, and you see a lot about management. And most boards should be looking for a youth perspective on their work. And so, you know, you might be saying, well, why on earth would they take me if I'm a student? But actually, they actually ought to be. So that's maybe something to think about. It's probably slightly too intensive in terms of energy, but I think that sort of thing shows that you care about something, and also that you're working on it, and you will get interesting perspectives that you can talk about in interviews and so forth. So that's one thought.
Yes, I've got three things, one of which Claire just said. No, that's absolutely fine, because I agree completely. I served on, I'm coming to the end of the term on a second board, but I was founding trustee of a small charity, and the perspective that you get and the insight that you get is really quite significant, which I don't think you would take a lot longer to get if you were sort of working your way up, you know, to director level. So that's thing number one. So I won't repeat it, but sort of agree with Claire on that. The second thing sort of touches on what Barbara said, which is about trying to get insight into the big picture. This I think really helped me get my civil service job, partly because seeing the big picture was one of their competencies, or I think they're called behaviors now, and just being able to take a step back from wherever you are and see how that fits into the larger picture and how it can be transferable. As I say, I imagine that would be useful across the board, but it certainly was useful for the civil service. And then the third thing, which is probably slightly frustrating actually, but seems to be the buzzword in the education world now, is about trying to demonstrate impact as much as possible, and that seems to be increasingly sought after. So if you want to sort of sell yourself in terms of what you have managed to achieve, then thinking about the different ways in which organizations and you as an individual can measure and demonstrate the impact of your work, that will, I think, help you regardless of the career in which you end up pursuing.
Wonderful. I think that those are all really good pieces of advice that I, again, will be writing down to find a board to join, hopefully. So I think a few of the questions are really beneficial for some particular panelists to answer. So I might ask those first, just because I think some of you will be able to give some very niche insight. The first one is, what pathway would you recommend into investment banking after completing a law degree? And I wonder, Barbara, if that's something that you might be able to speak to.
I think it was somewhat by chance, but in my first year, I did a summer internship with a law firm, but because it was very short, as I still have half of the summer left open, it was only a 6-week internship with one of those city law firm, and I happened to get to know some people during one of those events who work in a financial institute, and they encouraged me to apply for a second summer internship, which I didn't think of. But anyway, I took that advice and I applied and got in. to do a second internship in a financial institute. And that really helps because in my second year, then I applied to do an internship with Goldman Sachs, with the investment banking division, and that gave me a very good taste and experience of how it's like to be in investment banking, and that obviously helped me to get a job in investment banking upon graduation, even though I studied law, because I already know what it's like and what I can do well, or what they are looking for in a sense. And so I think if you want to pursue the path of investment banking, I highly encourage you to try out a summer internship. You have 2 summers, and many of these law firms offer summer internships that are relatively short, at least during my time. You can do 2 internships, or you can do 1 year law, 1 year finance, and you can compare and you can see where you fit in, what you like. I think ultimately the purpose of today's panel or talk is really to tell all the law students to have the inner confidence that this degree will let you do anything as long as you're good, as long as you like what you do, and just to have that confidence to pursue that and not be confined by the degree that you have, and find ways to step out of that. And I think internship is one, talking to people is one, finding mentors is another. So I think be creative and entrepreneurial in your approach, and you will never know what you will land to by doing that.
Absolutely. I think that that's incredibly important. I think that, all the points you made are really relevant and can help anybody who's considering not only the financial sector, but a lot of those would be helpful for anyone. Another field that people have asked about is the civil service, and what sorts of things can help to prepare for a career in civil service. So I think that might be well taken by Ali.
There's 2 Ali's and they're both civil servants.
Exactly. I think either of you would be able to answer this well, and from different.
I'm happy to go first, and then Ali J, if you have anything to add, please do jump in. I think that the most important thing to remember about the civil service is that it's fantastic that you have a law degree from Cambridge. Immense kudos. The civil service isn't particularly interested in that anymore, if it ever was. So when you come to doing your applications, many of the application forms won't even have a section for you to put in where you studied. They're just not interested. And when you do get in, I can tell you, no one likes the guy who goes on about how they went to Cambridge all the time. So the civil service is a fantastic place to work, and I think studying at Cambridge gives you a fantastic preparation for that. But it's about the skills that you gained, the analytical skills, people you met, and the confidence it gives you, as has been mentioned previously, rather than the fact that you can put Cambridge on your CV and expect an interview. There are, of course, loads of Cambridge grads in the civil service doing very, very well, doing very successfully, and I think that will continue. But it's not as straightforward as just expecting to get an interview because you are at Cambridge. It's not like that, and it will become less and less in the future.
Nothing particularly to add. I agree with what was said, and I just reiterate my point earlier about the civil service. Well, certainly my brief experience there, being really interested in people who were able to see the bigger picture. And I know several friends of mine that work in the civil service and have been able to use that particular skill to move move across to different departments within the civil service, which I think is relatively common. It just highlights the importance of that particular skill and the analysis that you the skill of analysis that you gain from the Cambridge Law degree as well.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much. I think we have time for one more question, maybe 2. And I just wonder, what sorts of careers do you think people who are considering taking a law degree or are currently undertaking a law degree, what sorts of careers do you think are often overlooked or not considered that actually might be well suited to law grads?
There's a huge range. I think it's almost an impossible question to answer. You know, at the end of the day, after what we've said about the skill set and so on, I think it's probably easier to find out what you don't want to do than it is to find out what you want to do initially, because you know I can think of, I mean, even those of us that did end up going into law, a lot of people have moved on to other things, and so even if you look at that point in people's careers, it's just such a vast range. Even on this panel, you know, if you look at the range of the things that we're doing, I don't think it's possible to pin it down. I mean, somebody else might have a formula for it, but I don't.
No, but I'll randomly push the NGO route, because I having done quite a lot of different things, that was the most fun thing that I did, and I think it's easier to do when you're young because it's exhausting. So maybe think about that. But no, I don't think there's I agree with Jennifer. I think part of I think the question is maybe in response to the fact that there is just so much out there that it's kind of mind blowing. But I'm not sure that we can help with that.
One last question, and Jennifer, I think you said that you'd be happy to take this one. Is it worth it for Canadian students, or perhaps students from other international nations, to study law in the UK? And are there any Canadian students who do currently study law at Cambridge?
I've got two Canadian friends who studied law with me at Cambridge. One was an undergrad and one was a master's student. They've both gone back to live in Canada. They are both lawyers, actually. One's a barrister and one's a solicitor, because, of course, Canada is a common law jurisdiction, so their qualification system is quite similar to ours. They both specialise in sort of comparative law kind of areas. One does international relations. And so it does depend, I think, for foreign students as to whether British law, specifically English and Welsh law, is relevant to potential career paths. If you are intending to become a qualified lawyer in your own country, you really should stay in your own country to do a law degree. But if you are somebody who wants to perhaps do international law, of which Cambridge is a major centre for international law globally, or perhaps want to get a comparative perspective, then go ahead. But obviously, if you want to do a law degree to then go into another field entirely, then of course, apply to Cambridge.
Wonderful. I think that takes us to just past 7. Thank you all so much for being here. I think this has been an incredibly interesting discussion. And I know that I learned a lot during our prep call, and I learned even more today. So thank you all very much. I think that this will provide a lot of kind of resources and angles for people to consider what they might be doing in the future after their law degrees, and the ways in which a law degree can be very good preparation for just about anything that you want to do. As you said, Jennifer, it's easier to consider the things that you can't do. So just to wrap it up, if anybody in the audience has any further questions that weren't answered, please do reach out to me. My email is outreach@law.cam.ac.uk, and I'm happy to try to answer what I can and direct other queries to anyone else. Thanks so much, everyone, for your insight, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.